Welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today, we're gonna take a look at the future of aviation, specifically how AI might be used in aviation. People want to know how AI could change what it's like to fly, and the Center for Security and Emerging Technology, CSET for short, has a report on this.
Yeah, and it's interesting, this CSET report, it's called Governing AI with Existing Authorities. And it's all about how the rules we already have could be used with this new technology.
Hmm.
And they use commercial aviation as their example.
Which makes sense when you think about it. I mean, while we love a good frequent flyer program, most people probably aren't super comfortable with robots flying them around, right?
Right.
There are just so many questions about how AI would even be regulated.
Yeah. And it's not just something that might happen way in the future. We're talking about, you know, a system that already uses automation. Did you know there are like 400 aircraft in U.S. airspace at any given moment?
Wow.
And that adds up to over 45,000 flights every single day.
I had no idea. I mean, that's a lot of planes to keep track of, and I'm guessing that someone has to do that, right?
Someone does. It's actually a surprisingly small number of people who manage this incredibly complex system. Only 14,000 air traffic controllers across the entire country.
Wow. I had no idea that there even were that few air traffic controllers in the entire country. 14,000. Really? That's it.
That's it. And that's actually one of the big concerns within the industry. This small group of people are responsible for something so important and complicated, and it's only going to get more demanding as air traffic grows.
That makes a lot of sense. So, where does AI come in?
Well, this CSAT report really focuses on two main areas where AI is, so to speak, already taking flight:
Yeah.
air traffic control and the system's onboard aircraft.
Okay, so let's start with air traffic control. That's probably what most people think of when they hear AI in aviation, right? I mean, those controllers have a really tough job. How could AI even be used to help them?
Right. So the idea isn't to replace human controllers altogether, at least not yet. It's more about giving them new tools and information to manage this increasingly complex airspace. Just think about the challenges they face. Staffing shortages, more crowded routes, radio frequency congestion.
Right.
It's just a lot for a human to keep track of, even with tons of training.
Yeah, not to mention the potential for human error. I mean, that's a scary thought in a field where the stakes are so high.
Exactly. And, CSET suggests AI could be used to support human capabilities in a few really important ways. For example, AI could optimize something called airspace sectorization, but do it in real time. Imagine the invisible lines in the sky that say which controller is responsible for which area. AI could redraw those lines dynamically based on things like real-time traffic and weather, even terrain.
So instead of like static sectors, they would constantly adapt, like ways for airplanes or something.
Exactly. It would be pretty fascinating to see how that impacts both efficiency and safety.
Yeah, that would be interesting to see.
And it doesn't stop there. Another idea is using AI to analyze all those incident reports. The ones that would take human analysts forever to go through them all. AI could potentially find patterns or safety trends that humans might miss.
So it could be used to like proactively address safety concerns and maybe even make air travel even safer for us.
That's the hope. And another interesting application the report talks about is using AI to create synthetic flight data, basically simulating those rare but risky situations that are almost impossible to recreate in real life.
It's like giving air traffic controllers a crystal ball so they can practice for even the most unusual situations. That's so cool.
Yeah, but we do have to remember that while AI has huge potential for air traffic control, it's not a perfect solution. There are potential downsides too.
Of course, of course. Like every new technology, it comes with its own challenges. So, what are some of the potential bumps in the road for AI in air traffic control?
Well, one of the biggest challenges is making sure that these AI systems are totally reliable and trustworthy. How do we even begin to certify them? How do we know for sure that they're going to perform as we expect in a life or death situation?
Yeah, at 30,000 feet, there's not a lot of room for error.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And at least in the beginning, AI could actually make things harder for air traffic controllers. They'll need to be trained on these new systems, adapt their processes, and learn to trust a computer to make really important decisions.
That makes sense. It's like if you got this super fast and super smart assistant, but then you realize you have to spend all this time teaching them how to work with you and support you best.
That's a great way to put it. And then there's the problem of automation bias. That's the tendency to rely too heavily on the AI's suggestions and possibly miss critical information that the AI didn't consider.
Right, right. Okay, so it sounds like AI could totally revolutionize air traffic control, but it's not going to be smooth sailing all the way, which makes me wonder, Does the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, even have the authority to regulate this technology? Like, do their current rules even apply to something like AI?
That is the million-dollar question. Does their rule book apply to AI? And that's exactly what CSET looks into. Do they have the authority to handle something as complex and fast-changing as AI?
Yeah. Because if anyone is going to make sure we're safe in the skies with AI flying around, it's the FAA.
Right, so let's dive into what authority they already have and see if those rules are ready for takeoff in this AI-driven world.
So what you're saying is the FAA could actually be able to regulate AI in aviation, even though the rules were written before AI was even a thing? That's kind of wild. How does that even work?
It all comes down to how those regulations are actually worded. See, the FAA has a lot of authority when it comes to air traffic control.
Uh-huh.
Their whole thing is to make sure that, navigation and traffic control are safe and efficient. And they have the power to develop, alter, test, and evaluate any systems or procedures that are related to that.
Okay, yeah, that sounds pretty broad, but does that automatically mean it covers AI too?
That is the million-dollar question. And this is where things get really interesting. The CSET report points out that this language, even though it was written way before AI existed, might actually give the FAA what they need. I mean, they don't specifically mention AI, but they do talk about computer-aided decision-making, which you could say is broad enough to include these new AI systems.
So they might not have seen it coming, but they kind of left the door open for AI regulation.
You definitely say that. But, and this is a big but, there are definitely some potential problems. The report mentions a few key challenges the FAA might run into.
Oh, I always love a good challenge. What could throw the FAA off course?
Well, one word: budget.
Oh, of course.
The FAA, like a lot of government agencies, often has to deal with limited budgets. And regulating AI in aviation, that's going to take a lot of resources. They'll need to hire more people, experts in AI, come up with new testing protocols, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. It's a massive undertaking.
And you know, the government isn't exactly known for quickly adopting new technologies.
Right.
Could that be a problem too?
That's another concern that CSET brings up. See, the FAA, they rely quite a bit on outside experts when it comes to developing and approving these new aviation technologies. And that can sometimes lead to delays and even potentially conflicts of interest.
Conflicts of interest? How so?
Well, think about it. A lot of times, the FAA is both the developer and the regulator for these air traffic control systems. So they set these strict safety standards, and then they're also in charge of making sure those standards are actually being met, even for systems that they might have had a hand in creating.
Yeah, that does sound a little tricky.
Exactly. And then there's another challenge, and it's kind of unique to AI. It's this idea of opacity.
Opacity, like you can't see through it.
Well, not literally.
Okay.
Opacity with AI means that these systems can be kind of like black boxes. They make these decisions, really complex ones a lot of times, but even the people who design them don't always understand how they reach those conclusions.
So it's like the AI is giving you an answer, but it's not showing its work.
Yeah, exactly.
And how can the FAA regulate something if they don't even really know how it works?
That is the question. And it's a major challenge the FAA is going to have to figure out. But, we've really only looked at one side of this whole AI and aviation thing, air traffic control. What about what happens on board in the plane itself? How might AI change what it's like to be a passenger?
You're right. We haven't even touched on AI in the cockpit. And that's where things could get really interesting and maybe a little scary for some people.
Right.
Just imagine having an AI co-pilot.
It might not be as crazy as it sounds. Modern aircraft, they already have those sophisticated autopilot systems.
Yeah, but autopilot's not exactly new, is it? I mean, the first autopilot system was actually introduced way back in 1912. People might be surprised to hear that. So we already rely on machines to fly us around, don't we?
That's true. And over the years, those systems have become incredibly advanced. In a lot of ways, today's pilots already act like supervisors. They keep an eye on the aircraft and all its systems and only really take manual control during specific phases of the flight. But this is where AI comes in. It has the potential to take things even further.
Okay, so what could AI do on board that current autopilot systems can't do? What would that look like?
Well, imagine an even more advanced autopilot system. It could not only maintain the altitude and direction of the plane, but it could actually make these real-time adjustments based on things that pop up unexpectedly. We're talking about navigating around turbulence, changing the route because of bad weather, even potentially landing the plane if there's an emergency.
Wow, that would be amazing. Especially for those of us who get a little nervous when there's turbulence. talk about a smooth ride. But what about those pesky maintenance delays that always seem to happen? Could AI help with that too?
For sure. Onboard diagnostics is another area that's perfect for AI. Imagine having these super smart algorithms that are constantly looking at data from all the aircraft's sensors. They could spot potential problems before they're even noticeable to the human pilots.
So it'd be like having an AI mechanic on board who can predict and maybe even prevent those frustrating delays?
Yes, exactly. Early detection means less downtime, fewer delays, and potentially even safer flights for everyone. And maybe the most radical possibility is, this idea of single pilot operations, where AI could help out or even replace one of the pilots in the cockpit.
Wait, hold on. AI could actually fly a commercial plane? Is that even realistic?
Well, it's something that companies are looking into. Airbus, for instance, they're already testing out autonomous emergency landing capabilities. Basically, the aircraft would land itself if the pilots couldn't do it.
Wow, that's amazing, but also a little scary. What about Boeing? Are they doing anything with AI?
Absolutely. Boeing is using AI to analyze all the data from their flight management systems, with the goal of giving pilots faster and more accurate diagnoses of any potential problems, which could be critical mid-flight.
Wow, so both of the major players are really embracing AI. But we have to talk about the risks. I mean, flying is incredibly safe, but all it takes is one big incident to really shake people's confidence.
You're right, and the CSET report does acknowledge the potential downsides. One concern is, data integrity. So AI systems can only be as good as the data they learn from, right? If the data is messed up or incomplete, it could lead to really dangerous and unpredictable results.
It's that classic garbage in, garbage out issue. So how do we even make sure that these AI systems are getting good, accurate information to learn from?
That's the billion-dollar question. We need thorough testing and verification. And this is where regulators like the FAA come in. They're the ones who will have to set those standards. And then, of course, there's the whole black box issue we talked about earlier. Even if an AI system is doing everything right, we don't always know why it's making the decisions it's making.
Right.
And that can be a huge obstacle to building trust, especially in aviation.
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing to trust an AI to pick out a movie for you, but it's a whole other thing to trust it with your life at 30,000 feet.
Exactly. And that brings us to another super important aspect. Pilot training. How do we prepare pilots for working with these increasingly intelligent AI systems?
So it's not enough to just know how to fly the plane anymore. They'll need a whole new set of skills to be successful in an AI-powered cockpit.
Exactly. The FAA, they already have the authority to approve pilot training programs and issue licenses. But as AI becomes more common in aviation, that training will need to adapt as well.
What kind of changes are we talking about here?
Well, for starters, pilots will need a deeper understanding of these AI systems, how they work, their weaknesses, how to recognize problems like that automation bias we talked about, and how to deal with those problems. It's all about working with AI as a partner, not just keeping an eye on it.
It's like going from a reactive role to a more proactive, collaborative one with AI as a true co-pilot. But it sounds like the FAA has some big challenges ahead in getting ready for this AI revolution.
Absolutely. The CSET report highlights two main ones, talent and testing.
Okay, let's break those down. What's the talent challenge?
That was pretty straightforward. To regulate AI effectively, you need people who really understand AI. But the government is competing with private companies for a very limited number of experts. And to be honest, private companies usually have the upper hand when it comes to things like salary and exciting projects.
Yeah, it's that classic brain drain problem. How do you even begin to fix that?
That's a great question. And there are no simple solutions. The Biden administration's executive order on AI does put some emphasis on attracting AI talent to government positions. But whether it'll be enough to close the gap, we'll just have to wait and see.
What about testing? What makes AI so tricky to test, especially when we're talking about something like aviation?
Well, AI systems, they're not like traditional software. Traditional software usually follows a pretty predictable set of instructions. But AI is constantly learning and changing, which makes it a lot harder to test every single possibility and guarantee it'll always behave as we expect.
So the old ways of testing and certifying might not work for AI.
Exactly. The FAA is going to have to come up with totally new methods and standards for evaluating how safe and reliable AI systems really are. And that will take a considerable amount of time, expertise, and resources.
It feels like we're really just at the beginning of this whole AI and aviation journey. Tons of potential, but some pretty big hurdles to overcome.
I completely agree.
Well, that's about all the time we have for today's deep dive. But before we go, we wanted to leave you with this thought. If AI can make flying safer, more efficient, and maybe even fly the planes for us one day, what role should human pilots play in the future of aviation? It's definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining us today, and as always, safe travels.